We're snorting cap rates and shooting up cash flow here at Deal Junkies. Welcome back to Deal Junkies. Junkies. Mike's a junkies looking at his phone. Quit spilling your coffee, bro.
Doing deals.
I had to bring in
Mike. Showed up drunk today.
No, I tossed my phone.
This is not the drunk real estate podcast. This is
Wrong
Deal
podcast.
Junkies. Wrong.
When are you gonna get Jay on? Also, we've been waiting. Did you text him? You were gonna text him after the last podcast.
No, when we have remote capability.
We have remote capability.
When can I go on Drunk Real Estate?
Never.
Oh. Okay.
After I go on Brandon Turner's podcast.
It's not very... Hey, we have the same number of likes
Drunk
on
Real
Spotify.
Estate doesn't have guests. They've had like 6 guests.
Haven't you been on it?
Twice.
Yeah.
Hey, shout out to the 0 to 100 tribe. That was cool. I had a fun time with Gabriel and Travis on that. And Trevor was just on Saucetown on Matt Cox's. What's that one called? Is it Saucetown Properties?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a Saucetown
I think it's a Saucetown Investor.
All right.
Podcast.
So Matt's just started a podcast. Yeah. Saucetown. You guys were like number 2 and 3 guests or what?
1 and 3. 1 and 2.
Who was the first guest? Matt? Mike?
Me.
You were the first guest on the podcast? Wow. They brought in the big guns to kick it off. All right. Well, we're going to do a quick episode here for you. One of our favorite things about real estate. What?
He's still drunk.
Pull it together, Mike. We love seller carry financing for many reasons. One, we don't have to deal with lenders, which can be difficult, especially right now. We don't have to deal with appraisers unless you want to. There's, usually more options in terms of how you negotiate the deal, and you might be able to get better leverage, better rates. There's lots of stuff. And what we want to talk about is why it's a good thing for the seller to do this, because it doesn't really work unless you're giving the seller what they want. So Trevor is going to tell us why a seller would want to carry a contract.
I want to first note, though, when you're a buyer and you learn how to do creative finance, every beginner tries to force it into every deal without thinking about why a seller would at first. So they start to learn all these tools, and then you try to put them all in the wrong spots, and then they wonder why they don't work. Yes. Yeah. So it's very important.
Right there is why people get it or don't get it.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, when you're looking at deals, which ones appear to be potential seller carries to you?
So, a typical seller carry is an older person who's self-managing and they're underperforming on the deal, so you can offer them terms where they can make a similar amount of money, avoid taxes, and then avoid the headache of owning the property. And that's one like Dane set up for us. Or sometimes it's they want this really high price for whatever reason. Like they're just stuck on the price. No one's willing to pay it, but you can get there by adjusting the terms to get to the price. Mike, why are you looking at me like that?
It's great. It's great for somebody who wants, maybe they want their price, but they don't need all the money right now.
Yeah. Or like Jordan talked about at the meetup, like the seller he bought it from, they wanted that $84,000 a year of tax-free capital gains, so they set their note to exactly that amount.
Yeah, and we've brought this up many times before, that real estate is the greatest wealth creation tool in the history of man. However, it doesn't have a lot of great exit strategies. So you create all this wealth, and then what do? A lot of people just end up dying because they don't want to sell it and pay taxes. They just take the cash flow till they're done, and then they pass it on to their heirs, and usually the kids sell and they take the money. So seller carry is one way to exit your real estate and to continue to make your cash flow. You don't have the same benefits of ownership. You transfer from being the owner to being a lender. So you take on new risk, but you take on a lot less work, and now you can get a check in the mail every month. Talk about mailbox money. You want mailbox money, be the lender, not the owner.
Yeah, and a lot of time when we're doing these seller carries, we're solving someone's problem. Like they have some piece of junk that they don't want to deal with anymore.
Yeah, so the property may not be financeable.
Mhm.
That's a great one for seller carry.
Yeah. One thing I really like a lot right now is, especially in the residential space, if you go and mix, so like you're putting 5% down on a home, you can go close, you can put 5% down, and you can mix bank financing with the seller carry, and it can make your deal pencil because now rates are super high. So maybe the seller, we did one where it's a $1.2 million transaction, for example. That would have been a jumbo loan. It doesn't pencil at 7% for the dude who wanted to buy the house in ADU and rent the other one out and then eventually rent it all out. But we got 4% seller carry for 50% of it at IO.
So now you have a blended rate that makes sense.
5.5, and you get under the jumbo loan limit, so your first position loan rate also lowers.
Yeah.
And because the first position loan is less than 80% LTV, you get rid of PMI. So you have savings across the board on that. Now you can pencil a deal.
That's amazing.
And then the seller is also stuck on this price, right? Because they just saw a year ago my house would have sold for this, right? Now it's not selling. What's going on?
You can stay under your jumbo cap. You don't have to be there because there's a seller carry component.
Yeah, because it just looks at the first position loan for the jumbo.
But they allow you to have it as long as you don't exceed 80% or whatever the appraised value is. When you're talking about
PMI?
no PMI.
So for PMI, anytime you put less than 20% down, you'll have PMI.
Yeah.
So if that first position, they consider the seller carry as your down payment almost when they're looking at PMI. So if you have an 80% bank loan rather, and just a 15% seller carry and 5% down, you'll also get rid of PMI.
Which can be substantial, especially on a
Hundreds of dollars a month, yes.
Yeah.
It's almost a percent. It's like 0.85%. It fluctuates.
And it's very hard to take it off, even once your equity position is correct. Like on an FHA loan, you can't ever take it off.
If you put less than 10% down on FHA, it will be there for the life of the loan.
Until you refinance, yeah.
Yes. And then on conventional, it's once you hit like 20 to 25% equity through like loan pay down, or you can go pay $3,000 for an appraisal and then
then you can petition to have it taken
Yeah, and
off.
then it might not appraise depending on what they're looking at, and then you just spent $3,000 to try to get rid of it.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay, so tell me, so there are risks obviously involved in seller carry. So when you're, a lot of people would say, well, I don't want to carry because, I am older and now I'm going to sell it to you and you may screw my property up and then not make the payments in a few years and hand it back to me, and then I'm going to be even older, and I'm going to have to come clean this mess up, and I'm going to have to go through the foreclosure process and all these other things. So there are risks involved. So you want to be very, very diligent as a seller when you become the lender to do your due diligence on the borrower to make sure that they can actually repay you, right? And they're a good operator.
Yeah, so you want to make sure they have the wherewithal to repay you. They have an actual plan, because what a lot of sellers do, well, I don't know how many sellers try to take back their properties, but a lot of sellers will offer a 1 to 2 year balloon with low down. It's like, okay, it's not a value add property. How does someone get out of this? And they don't think about, or the broker doesn't think, they're like, just pay it off. Just pay
it off. Write it down.
Just go refinance it. And you're like, how do you expect this refinance to occur? And they can't think 3 more steps
So
ahead.
what I find is that there are a lot of people out there that will seller carry, especially if they own the property free and clear. But typically what they do is they go to their CPA and they ask them, if I seller carry, how does this affect me? And it's nice because they're only paying taxes on the down payment, and then they get to kick that can down the road and just pay income tax on the interest coming in until they pay the loan off. But a CPA will almost 100% of the time tell them, yes, seller carry, whatever the rate is, 5 or 6%, and get 20 to 25% down. Why does the CPA always advise them to get 20 to 25% down?
They think it's more secure. So they're thinking in terms of the deal rather than the borrower itself. So like we were looking at $1 million deal that was 5 lots, for example, in Salem. And the numbers worked for us at 10% down. They're like, we need 20% down. And we're like, okay, that throws off all our numbers, so we can lower your price. And they're like, we can't lower the price either. I'm like, okay, you're going to go sell this with worse terms to a worse borrower who cannot perform.
And now you're taking
versus
more
you're
risk.
selling it to Gabe Johansson and Mark Gallegos, who
and
own
Dane McKinney.
Our co-signer Dane.
Yes,
and Dane,
sir.
who own X amount of real estate and do these types of projects. You're going to go sell it to a newbie who's willing to give you this money down and not perform. And now they're going to tear down your houses that you had here and now your property is worth less.
Yeah, I've had sellers that told me they did want to carry, but they wanted to carry at terms that were worse than what you could get at the bank. I said, well, all you're doing is advertising for somebody who doesn't qualify for a bank loan. If you're going to sell or carry, you should be competitive with the banks. I mean, yeah, you don't have to buy an appraisal maybe, or yeah, you don't have to go through the whole underwriting process. But if the bank's offering 6%, you can't charge 8%. If the bank's offering 20% down, you can't say you want 30% down. Like, you have to do something that competes with the bank in order to get a borrower that actually qualifies.
Yeah, there's sellers that genuinely want to carry, and then there's sellers that will do an owner carry because they think that it serves them. And so you just look at the terms that you're discussing, and that quickly tells you what type of a seller you're talking about. So the typical thing you see is interest rates slightly below what a bank wants, a down payment just like what a bank wants, and a short balloon payment. That's not a lender. They want you to pay a higher price. They think they will get a higher price if they just push their cash off a little bit. That only works for a really value add property where it makes sense to do that. For seller financing, you want a seller that wants the business relationship that is associated with being a seller financier, and that's what you're truly looking for. And so it's the pros and the cons. The pros and the cons for the buyer about seller financing is you get to negotiate everything in one transaction. Mm-hmm. The purchase price, the debt, the equity, the maturity date, all of that is negotiated as one big, huge pie, and you can change the ingredients inside of that pie. Mm-hmm. If you don't do seller financing, you have very few levers in the purchase that you can negotiate. It's usually time, earnest money, price, repairs. That's what it is. Then you have to go get the debt separately, and you're either with a bank where they tell you what equity it's going to be and what the interest rate's going to be and what the maturity date's going to be, or you're negotiating with a private lender. And so you want the seller that you're negotiating all those things together because it makes the deal better for them, and they know that how you mix those ingredients makes the deal better for them, while at the same time you're mixing those ingredients to make sure it's better for you. Mm-hmm. And that's where it becomes the win-win. But if a seller isn't trying to give you a win, they're not a seller financier. They're using seller financing to get something for them. And I mentioned in the last recording, so I've got a seller who wants $2 million for a piece of shit 10 unit that's worth $900. I offered him $2 million, and I wrote out part of that email.
Is it really worth $900?
Yeah, that's literally at $900 on the back end. You'll have 74% LTV and a freaking 1.1 DSCR, and like.
What is it average rent per unit?
It's like $1,600.
Bah. Right now?
No, that's market rent. You've got 18 months. You've got.
What's the current average rent per unit?
$800.
Okay.
Oh, it's half.
And then it's in.
You have to
crap
vacate.
condition.
You have 10 relocation notices, 10 unit turnovers, an entire exterior envelope, and he wants. So it's worth 2.2 if you do all that.
How do you make that pencil at $2 million on your terms? Like,
right, because it doesn't make sense.
Are you doing no payments,
yeah.
zero interest?
Yeah, exactly. Which is low down payment. So you get you leverage the property for a little bit down, and then the plan is to do the envelope. So raise enough capital that you can do a low down payment, do the envelope, do rent increases, and then you're basing your strategy on rent increasing people out rather than relocating them out.
So you buy yourself some runway to get the rent roll turned around.
How long do you do for a balloon on that one?
So when I was telling him on the phone, I was like, it's got to be 20 years. Like it's got to be 20 years. And what I actually modeled it out to was at year 12, I can probably refinance. That would be about a 70. Year 15, I'm comfortably at a 64%
That's
LTV.
a long runway.
It is a long runway, and in the meantime,
is that even worth doing?
Mike's about building wealth. We just learned.
So that's
there we go. Guy. We answered the question.
I've always been about building wealth. That's what
we figured it out.
The chessboard is about.
We
wealth.
never asked you what your chessboard.
The chessboard is wealth, but I just see it as the real estate, not the wealth. That's all it is. It's the lens I look at it from. But so what I structured it as is no interest first year, 1%, and then it steps up. And then what I modeled out is it needs $450,000 in work, but we're only raising $250,000 in capital. Because every penny of the pro forma is going back into the property to do all the other CapEx. And so all the CapEx is done out of the cash flow, so there is no cash flow. But in 8 years, you get your capital back.
So the benefit to your seller is he gets his price.
Yep.
He doesn't have to pay the big cap gains hit. He gets to have passive income for the next 12 to 20 years. And he's got an income stream. He no longer has to worry about anything other than you making that payment.
Correct.
I mean,
so and then put yourself in his shoes. Well, his other option is the 1031 exchange. And so if you 1031 exchange, you're going to sell it for cash a lot less than you did 1031. What kind of multiplier do you have to get the type of return I'm offering him? I'm essentially offering him a really nice 1031 exchange juiced, right? So 15 years down the road, this asset looks completely different. So the entire payout's like $2.8 million. So maybe he can go find someone like I'm offering 9. Maybe he can find someone that pays him 1.2. But where's he? The likelihood he's going to go find an asset that he pays for 1.2 and makes it worth 2.8. He bought this one for 6 and it's worth, I actually think he bought it for like 7, and it's
worth 9.
Yeah, it's worth 9.
How long ago did he buy it?
12 years, 2011, 12, 13 years ago. No rent increases, no maintenance.
Oh,
because of the mindset of vacancy. I don't want vacancy.
Yeah, one of those
he's like,
guys.
it's great. Cash flow's great. Yeah, so I don't like this.
Not a spreadsheet guy.
I don't like the structure because it doesn't have any cash flow. It's a huge delayed gratification. However, the interest that goes along with that note. So you're creating a note. That's what you're creating. Look at it from a note standpoint. And so if I can create a big note with an interest rate of 2%, how effective is that note in the marketplace attached to value add property? So essentially I'm giving him the note size for a performing asset. I'm taking a shitty asset, making it a performing asset. So now I can go borrow like it's a performing asset at market rate terms, but then liquidate his note at below market terms. Mm-hmm. So now on that next purchase, so I take his debt and the cash I got out of the refi, and instead of being a leverage buyer on that next purchase, I'm the cash buyer on the next purchase. So instead of going to a seller and like he wants the $2 million, so instead of go to another seller that wants the $2 million, I go to the other seller that takes the $900. Mm-hmm. And so now I've taken that asset, overpaid for it, created debt and leverageability to then turn me into a cash buyer for that next asset. And then I don't have to go use bridge debt. So part of the reason it's 900 is because, dude, I've got 123 grand of financing in that first 18 months. Mm. Right? So now I take that out of the equation. I can go pay $1 million because I'm cash. Mm-hmm. And it's the same outcome for me, but I'm more competitive in the marketplace.
You got Trevor even confused on that one.
Dane was distracting me. He was texting.
But that's what you want the seller that sees it as a business. If the seller doesn't see that they're working with you as a business partner, they're not a financier.
Well, and that's a good point because they do become your lending partner. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons we love to try to keep a seller in a deal is we're not going to get hung up on too many of the details. We know somebody's more than likely not going to try to put us in a big problem, although we have had that happen where we kept a seller on as a lending partner and they put us into a big problem. But the deal was good enough to where we didn't complain about it, I guess.
Well, and let me explain like how you can make this happen, right? So he paid $700, his basis is $700. We're only giving him $50 grand down. He has a lot more basis to extract. So we can reposition that property. We can make it much nicer. If he has an objection of, I don't have it, well, we can refinance in 2 years. Give him another $500,000 a principal at that time. So he's got a $1.95 million note. If we pay it down by $500,000, now we're just taking 1.4 or whatever that number is, or whatever that math is, to move it around.
He's just letting you take over as operator.
Mm-hmm. You just do it in bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay. So seller carry. Is this, it's not for everybody, but I would say it intrigues me to sell properties like this one day.
We have sold properties this way.
We have sold properties this way.
Because there's value in it.
But I like the idea of not carrying the whole thing. I like the idea of just giving somebody a personal loan for 20% or something on a,
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering on your deal, it sounds like he has a lot of value tied to the property and you're going to go raise money for it. Why don't you just leave him in the deal and make him your LP?
Yeah, that's a potential scenario as well.
Because then there's a super win-win.
Super win-win.
Super.
Which is, I haven't met the person I haven't met him in person. I've had one previous phone call. I've driven by the property. He's ghosted me since. We were supposed to call after I drove by the property, and a year's gone by, and then we re-engaged. And so the actual subject line of my email is offer spectrum. And I gave him the cash offer, and I gave him the $2 million offer, an explanation of why these are so different and what I'm asking.
He's going to ask you for the $2 million, but in cash now.
That's quite
tends
possible.
to happen.
That's quite possible. I want to put the other way of where I started my email was, now that it looks like we're earnestly moving down the road, I've put a lot of time into projecting this out. So I'm planting the seeds of this is a relationship. Like, you got a rough verbal offer. There's no projection. Now that we're looking earnestly, and so what I expect to happen, he's like, I want $1 million down. And then that's when I'm going to go back with, okay, well, we can do, and $2 million. Well, we can do it this way. You're going to get 50 now, and it's going to be 650 total, and you're going to get that other 600 later. See, I'm setting up that type of negotiation. Or it could be seller help with the $1 million down bridge debt like we did on the care facility, and he's in second.
We love seller helps.
Mm-hmm. I'm not as much as the seller.
He sounds like, I bet you don't buy it. He's not a real guy.
I think one thing that's interesting about the market that we're in right now.
This guy's such a dick.
Yeah.
Bridge burner.
He always has to throw shade at you at some point.
Well, Mike's my favorite person because he gives me the reactions. If I say it to anyone else and they just look at me,
yeah, we don't.
Gas
no,
lighting.
that doesn't get me what I need. Doesn't say it to Mike and he goes.
His favorite dopamine, his gaslighting.
I think we're in a market today where you're more likely to find seller carry than you would in other markets because the market is less liquid. There's less transaction volume. It's harder to put deals together. A lot less lenders are actually lending. So for the sellers who are truly motivated that want to sell right now, I think this is a great time to be out shaking the tree and trying to find people that want to be creative.
And you nailed it. The seller financing typically exchanges price for liquidity. You're giving them higher price. They're giving you better liquidity.
It honestly feels like the 70s and 80s to me. I don't know if you guys remember that, but
do you remember that?
Yeah. It's just,
what were you doing in the 70s?
Being that I was born in 79, I was...
It's throwing me back to those days. This is the best way to do a deal. It's the only way you get
What year were you born? In 2000?
No, it was before that.
Oh,
1999.
1999. The end of 99.
Yeah. But it throws me back to that. I just...
All right, we got to go.
I live vicariously.
I got my appraiser texting me 7 messages.
All right, so seller carry is great for us. It's great for the seller. It can be, but I think the number one takeaway is you've got to do what's good for the seller. So in every deal you're looking at, identify what the needs of the seller are, and you can find out. One of the easy questions to ask is, when you sell, what are you going to do with the money? And oftentimes people say, I don't know, I have no idea. Or another great question is, have you spoken with your CPA? Because if they have, then they found out they're going to pay a huge tax bill. And so usually the majority of the time, I think Logan told us it was 80-something% of the time, a seller does not need all of the money. And so get creative, talk to people, look for people who may not want to own their property any longer, but they would love to keep making cash flow on it and not have to be in the driver's seat of day-to-day operations.
If you find a seller who's interested in a seller carry and you would like to structure the deal but aren't sure how, send Dane at smire.com an email and we'll do the deal with you.
We'll show you how to do it, or we'll do it with you.
Shout out to Mitchell. I got a direct message on Facebook from Mitchell. He's like, I got a seller carry deal, and he got a huge coaching session out of that for me. It was a bad deal. I just gave my phone number and said, if you want to know why this is a shitty deal, give me a call.
And then you stole it from him?
If you have a good seller
if you want you have a shitty deal and want coaching,
go to Mike. If you have a good deal, go to Dane. Hope
All
that's
right.
clear.
Fuck you, Dane.
You said it. I just reiterated.
All right, and that's a wrap. Thanks, guys, for listening. Please share us, and we'll see you next time.